Welcome to Previously on X-Men, the podcast that looks back on X-Men comics, movies, shows, characters, and more. You can find more about this show and others like it at our network's website, radiomeanwhile.com, where we have a forum for you to share your thoughts on this and upcoming episodes. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Previously on X. Please rate, subscribe, and share the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. I'm Eric Mickles, known online as Dusk vs. Tweak, and with me is Hilary Gunning.
Hello!
And today, we are covering a comic book, which means we're talking about the 1999 Gambit ongoing series.
This is the first comic book we've done.
No. Giant Size X-Men #1.
Yeah, you're right.
I've already
wiped it from my mind.
You're going to have to reread it again now.
Krakoa does not show up in
Gambit.
The Gambit series.
And that's maybe why it was canceled. After they're like, if you're not going to put Krakoa in here,
Where is Krakoa?
Yeah.
Where is Krakoa?
I need to thank G. Kendall and Paul O'Brien for their archival work on these issues from both the early 90s and later on, or from the late 90s and early on. Mm-hmm. Paul O'Brien was reviewing it as it was being released, and then G. Kendall did a updated review sometime a couple of years ago. So they helped with some of the publication stuff.
That's cool.
Before we get into our histories with this comic, I just wanted to talk about how it started. So apparently, Marvel was moving away from Team X-Men books in the late 90s. Mm-hmm. They wanted to focus more on solo books. Gambit, along with Bishop, was one of the few super popular characters in the early 90s who had never received an ongoing series. Gambit had received 2 4-issue miniseries, but he never got an ongoing in the 90s. Mm-hmm. Which is too bad because 1999 was a little late to get on the Gambit train. Yeah.
I wonder why they never wanted to kind of explore him. He seems like he's got a lot going on.
I don't know. I guess maybe when you're doing 4-issue miniseries, you can have a new #1 every other year. But
yeah, I hate that.
So for this series, it's written by Fabian Nicieza, and the artist was Yannick Paquette. First, let's talk about our histories with this comic.
My history is not interesting with this comic. My history is I got it relatively recently because I like Gambit. I had not read much, and then I read it.
Yeah. I know that history is true because me and my wife are the one who got you that. But I think whether it was a birthday or a Christmas gift is kind of lost to the ages now.
I think it must have been Christmas.
I think it was a birthday. Though maybe I could go to my Amazon purchasing history.
We could nail this down. And I think the listeners deserve it.
I do have a history with this comic.
You have a history
and that
with this
comic. A history of not reading this comic. Because I was getting into the X-Men comics in 2000, 2001.
Yeah, I was wondering if this was right in there for you.
It was over by the time I was going to my comic book shop on a regular basis. Even though I was reading X-Men comics in 2000, 2001, it was mostly the essentials, and I just didn't know where to start normally. So in 2002, when I was going to my comic shop regularly, I would see this series, but the comic book store I went to didn't have the whole series. It just had it in pieces, and there was never a #1. And so I just never bought it. And over the years, I would go on eBay and look for Gambit full series, and I'd find them, but they'd be too expensive, and I wanted it, but I just never committed, even though I was buying other whole book series. It wasn't. They had the first volume, the one you have, the trade paperback. It took them forever to release it. The one you have is relatively recent, and then I got the Marvel Unlimited app, and they only had the first 13 issues. The trade that you have is what they had on the Marvel Unlimited app, because only last year did they put out Volume 2, which finished the series.
That was last year?
Yeah. Until they put the second 13 issues on Marvel Unlimited, I did kind of troll the Marvel support Twitter.
I remember that.
I would take
that was over this?
Yeah, every Monday I would see if they put it out, and they would put out other stuff, and I would go to the older issues from the 80s or something that they put up instead. I'd take a screenshot, and then I would tweet at them today, and what Marvel decided to release instead of the 1999 Gambit series, Wolfpack #1. And it was always I guess it was kind of annoying on my end, but I wanted to read the comic, and like I said, unless you got the single issues, but it was one of those things that the critical reception online was very positive when I started researching all that stuff. So it became this series. I'm like, oh, this sounds fun. I want to read it.
Yeah.
I like Gambit. And it was only like 2 years ago, last year, that I read this.
Wow, that's
not even.
nuts.
I guess it'd be this year.
Yeah.
I guess I'd have to go on my Goodreads. But so the series picks up threads of Uncanny X-Men 350, in which Gambit's dark secret was revealed.
Yeah.
I paid $20 for that comic book.
See, that storyline I have only ever heard of. I've never actually read it.
I told you the story. I think I cut it out last time. Where my friend grabbed that comic at our comic book store before I could get it. The issue 350. Yeah. And so instead, I was just buying the issues that were around it. The ones that took place before and after it. Which I ended up really enjoying a lot of the stuff that was happening there. This is going to spoil X-Men 350 for you. Gambit's dark secret is revealed.
Yep.
His dark secret is that he was hired by Mr. Sinister to collect the Marauders, who then went on to kill all the Morlocks. Yeah. The Morlock massacre, the mutant massacre, happened in the mid to late 80s. Gambit is now like retroactively inserted into that storyline. There's been some issues where
okay, I didn't know that.
He's like there.
So that's not like a real thing. Then.
Yeah, his history ties into with Marrow. Marrow is there during the Morlock massacre. He saves her once he realizes what's happening, what Sinister was doing.
I see.
And so that's
here's something I want to ask you about. Because whenever I hear about this Antarctica situation, it blows my mind, and I want to know if when you're reading the actual story of this happening, of when like they find out about Gambit with the Marauders, and then they leave him alone in Antarctica. So like when you read this, are they sympathetic when they do this? Like do you like or you're like, yeah, sure, leave your colleague of many years to starve to death in Antarctica. That is fine.
It's been many years since I read 350, but it does end with the X-Men leaving and Rogue being very upset with him and him just being in Antarctica. And the next couple of issues and other issues later, it's mentioned that the X-Men actually looked for him and that he hid from them in order he didn't want to be found because he was upset. And also
that is not how it plays in this volume.
No, so they kind of retroactively was like, no, we tried.
Suck.
Yeah, it's rough. People have commented on that, but it's apparently been fixed. He came back to the X-Men like 10, 11 issues later and joins the team and everything. But then this series picks up to how did he escape Antarctica is what this series is basically covering for at least 24 issues. So the series lasted for 25 issues, and it's the longest running Gambit series yet.
That's not bad. That's not a bad run.
No, the two that followed in the mid-2000s lasted for 12 issues and then 17 issues. So he hasn't been able to keep a full...
I think I've read one of those.
Yeah.
Because I read a run of Gambit that was shorter.
Maybe it was the 12th issue one then.
Maybe.
The series was given a 6-issue send-off miniseries called Gambit and Bishop, Sons of the Atom, which finished up both their books because both Gambit and Bishop were canceled in 2001.
Oh, well, it's nice they got to finish up.
Yeah, the series never had strong sales, but mainly because, as I said, people have commented that Gambit, the comic series, came like 5 years after his peak popularity.
Yeah.
And people kind of thought it was kind of a joke. I think people are a little over Gambit in the comics. He was a bit overexposed. And the cartoon series would have been over for probably about, 2-3 years at that point. Without that constant reaffirming that he's so cool.
They are done with him.
Was a surprise critically. As I said, internet talk around it was pretty positive. Nicieza was fired from the book and left at issue 24, and then the book was canceled at issue 25.
No way, that's funny.
I just read an interview with him today talking about how they asked, how do you feel about being fired from Gambit and then it being canceled? He's like, well, I'd rather it be canceled after I've left rather than being on there and then it gets canceled.
Oh my word.
So from what I read, it was due to the X-Men editors wanting less X-Men books out there, which is ridiculous because I'm pretty sure a year after there were 15 X-Men books out there. So there's always too many X-Men titles to buy.
So there's 2 volumes of it, right?
2 volumes in trade paperback form. Yeah. Fabian, he brings in what we've known about Gambit at this point. So we get the Thieves Guild.
Yep.
And we get Belladonna. And Gambit is being kind of played as a swashbuckling Robin Hood-ish kind of character. He's not really... He's more smiley and jovial than like the dark, brooding, hiding in shadow.
Yes and no. Especially at the beginning and sort of at the end. Like at the beginning, at the end,
right.
He is very down. And hating himself and blah. Yeah, but in the middle you see a lot, especially with the flashbacks, you see a lot of him like as a younger man before.
Yeah, there's we see scenes of Gambit being like trained to be a thief. The two miniseries that I talked about, they're very much like 90s cool, sketchy art, a lot of shadow. It's very broody and
see, I think I would have preferred that.
Really? What first struck me is that it is dense.
It is so dense. Oh my gosh.
This series is so much more dense than you kind of expect a Gambit series to be.
Yeah.
I think that's because Fabian has been a long-time X-Men writer. Him and Scott Lobel basically like steered the X-Men titles after Chris Claremont left and Jim Lee jumped over to Image. I think if you're coming off of a Chris Claremont, who is also like he feels like he invented like the dense, where every panel you have to absorb everything. I think that's what he was kind I going for.
It's text heavy and it's character heavy and it's
history heavy. There's interludes.
Heavy. The interludes
drive you crazy.
I hate the interludes.
Yeah.
I hate them so much. Because there's the lady who's in people's dreams, Fontanelle, Fontel, something like that, who goes into all these people's dreams, and you eventually realize that she's trying to find information on Gambit.
Yes.
But then he also has an actual ghost.
Yep.
And that's just one of the subplots in this series.
Yes.
And early on especially, you have no idea what's going on. So you're just like reading along and then it's like interlude. And you're like, what? Who? What? Why?
See, as a teenager, I would have loved this series with all of that because like Deadpool's like mid-90s series by Joe Kelly was also very dense and text heavy, not just because Deadpool was talking so much, just because there was just a lot in there and he was doing a lot of character work himself. So as a teen, I would have just sat there and I would have absorbed everything. But now at 32, when I'm reading most of my comics before I go to bed, there were times where I didn't even finish an issue before I went to bed. I'm like, well, that's half this issue.
Yep.
Off to bed.
Yep.
I don't want to disparage the books because the guy was doing a lot of character work and everything, but this style was definitely going out of fashion in the 90s, and it definitely was gone by 2001 when decompression was the style of...
Well, I mean, you can't really blame the guy for going so deep because it's coming out of such a like traumatic, character heavy, history heavy event.
Yeah.
Like coming straight out of Antarctica.
Yeah,
I mean,
Gambit...
you just sort of have a lot going on. It's hard to blame him.
Yeah.
But also, it's boring and hard to read.
Gambit throughout this series is trying to figure out where he stands with the X-Men and where he stands with Rogue. Yep. And also, his powers start going out of control.
He's got this new son guy that he's going on missions for, and you don't really know why.
The new son helped him get out of Antarctica.
Yeah.
And he's trying to figure out why the new son helped him get out of Antarctica.
Yeah. While being, like, weirdly, very strictly loyal to this guy, which seems a little strange for him.
Yeah. Every issue is very standalone. So, and I think part of that is maybe Fabian knew trades were on their way, but he was also writing a long story. It wasn't, none of the stuff, nothing that he tells is very like 6 issues is a story.
I don't know. Maybe it's because it was kind of a newer thing to do. I don't really know. But I feel like the way that it's both standalone and has the overarching thing is bad. It's just poorly done because it's like you have, like if it had just been standalones, I think that could have been strong and just like given the style of his character, if you're just like, he's doing this thing where he's stealing for this person and he's doing, or do like an overarching story.
Right.
I don't think that it worked to do both. I think it often could work to do both, but the way they did it, I thought was just bad because it was like you'd have a standalone and then you'd be like, oh yeah, and also there's this new son and also there's this thing with the lady who's like weird looking, like old looking, but also sexy.
Yeah.
Going into people's dreams.
She's always dressed super sexy, but she also looks 80.
It's just, and so it all it does is distract you.
Yeah.
It's like you can never settle when you're reading these books.
Yeah. There's time travel.
What's the thing where like his stepdad looking for that gem or whatever that
There's a lot of magic and stuff. Like 98, 99 was a rough time for the X comics. Chris Claremont had come back and done a really bad run.
Oh, that's not good.
On Uncanny and X-Men.
Don't come back. Leave strong.
There was a 6-month gap in all the X books that it was one of the next issues all said 6 months later from the previous thing, and a lot of people were annoyed by that. He's bringing in characters that have a history with Gambit. The X-Men are in it, but he's also creating... And the Thieves Guild is in it.
I'm interested in the Thieves Guild.
Yeah, well, that's very Gambit stuff.
Yeah.
But then there's also a bunch of new characters he's introducing.
There's that pig guy. He's so gross.
But at the same time, it's also kind of sometimes just mission person of the week. Or month in this case. I mean, there's a fun issue where he's like, Storm's there, because him and Storm have a history.
I really like that.
Where Gambit is doing a mission for the New Sun, but also that means he has to, but he's also helping Moira McTaggart and Storm, but he's doing something to help the New Sun, so he uses his power to do something sneaky, but then it might cause a whole problem, so he has to jump out of a plane and save the day.
Yeah, see, that kind of thing is very interesting. Yeah. Having him have to be duplicitous with his teammates while he's trying to sort of like reforge their relationship. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And I feel like in a newer style book, that could have been more, I guess, maybe emotion driven and less like, I am telling a story and here is the story. I feel like that could have been good, but it didn't speak to me.
For a little bit, besides the New Sun, it's kind of reads like the main antagonist throughout this book is going to be the Executioner, who I just found out before we started recording, you have no interest in whatsoever.
Nope.
So
less after reading about him.
The Executioner is a former FBI agent.
Is it FBI?
Maybe CIA?
Something like that.
Yeah. So he's basically, he puts himself all in this armor of different tech. There's Shi'ar tech, there's Sentinel tech, there's all this technology that he's used to make to armor and weapons, and he's going basically after mutants who have broken the law, and that usually includes the X-Men. He basically just sees it as like, all mutants are dangerous, so I gotta take care of them.
Well, that's another thing that's weird about the series, because it does very strongly read as if the Executioner is going to be his main villain.
Yeah.
But it's only for a couple of issues. Yeah. And then there's another one that's written like it's going to be the main villain. It just keeps going through that, and it doesn't feel like a series of villains.
I don't think Gambit really has a rogue gallery.
It doesn't feel like villain of the week.
Yeah.
It feels like they have like the weight of like a series long villain, and then they're just gone.
I like the Executioner. Every time I see him, I'm like, oh, it's the Executioner. I like the concept, I guess.
It's not a bad concept.
Yeah. But I remember reading this and going like, oh, he's not as super cool. There is a fun scene in here where the Executioner has like Gambit locked up or like trapped in some tech, and Gambit is chewing a piece of gum and charges the gum and shoots it at the Executioner's face, which then causes his helmet to explode, which I thought that's cool.
Yeah.
So
it's fun to see creative uses of the powers.
Yeah, the Executioner doesn't stay long, but mainly because, like I said, I don't think Gambit really has a rogue ally. They try to... Throughout the 90s, it was kind of like, Sabretooth and Gambit are also enemies, just like Wolverine.
Yeah.
You love Sabretooth and Wolverine? Well, you also love Gambit?
Gambit too, I guess.
And I mean, I guess once you bring in the Marauder history, in which Sabretooth is part of, it makes sense, but it always just kind of comes across as like an also-ran relationship. Like, this works for Wolverine and Sabretooth, so it should work and it doesn't.
Yeah. In these issues, it reads as if they have an emotional connection of some kind, and it just doesn't.
I should say, as a teenager, I was always excited to see Gambit and Sabretooth fight, but I was just excited for anything that seemed super cool.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, Psylocke and Sabretooth fighting.
Whatever.
Basically anyone fighting Sabretooth, I guess.
Yeah.
So you don't like Sabretooth.
I don't care about Sabretooth. I guess I don't dislike him. It's possible I dislike him.
Wait, are you in love with Sabretooth?
Protesting too much. But there's just so many of these grand villains, and you're right, it doesn't read true because he doesn't really have a rogue gallery. And what you kind of want, which is funny use of words, rogue. I guess what I want from Gambit is just smaller stories. Like I would be more interested in like little snapshots of like, he's gonna go into that mansion, he's gonna steal a thing, there's gonna be a girl that he talks to, he'll get involved in some like her dad is mean to her or whatever, he'll save her, blah. That kind of story is what I want from Gambit. I don't care about all of these.
So you want a teenager Gambit in a Romeo and Juliet Robin Hood situation.
Yeah, or like a later Gambit who like decides to take a trip and go do stuff. You know what I mean? Like that's what I want. I don't like, it doesn't feel authentic to him to have him going from big villain to big villain to big villain.
Well, I mean, Executioner and Sabretooth aren't huge.
But they're treated as huge. You know what I mean? Like, they're treated like it's this grandiose thing.
Well, I guess Executioner works for Gambit because Gambit is a thief. And so if Executioner's thing is mutants who are breaking the law, then Gambit's probably, up at the top of the list.
And to be fair, they do have, in the extensive inner monologue of the Executioner throughout his tenure
Executioner does talk about his beliefs a lot.
He does talk about his beliefs a lot. And he does admit very late that he has sort of, like, manufactured this, like, enmity with Gambit. Yeah. Like, he just sort of, like, puts it on him because he needs something. So there's that. There's at least that.
Really, his only villain is Belladonna, but that's kind of like a unrequited love.
That's like a soap opera villain.
Yeah.
Which I kind of dig.
Yeah, no, I like the episode of the animated series with Belladonna is one of my favorites. Like, when she's in charge of the Assassin's Guild?
Yes.
Karen. There's an Assassin's Guild and a Thieves Guild. When she's in charge of the guild and she's mad at Gambit, like and with their romantic history growing up and training and everything, like that stuff is interesting. But like once you get past the guilds and Belladonna, there's not much there. And I think I would like the guilds more if they weren't so mystical all the time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
If they were just literally assassins and thieves.
Yes, exactly.
Instead of like always with crystals and now the history.
Which also seems to fit better with Gambit because Gambit does not seem at all, he seems like a pragmatic character rather than a mystical character. So his backstory would be nice if it was settled in that kind of a tone.
Yeah. So Sinister shows up. And
which is interesting because...
He's more of a... if anyone, I guess, because he hired Gambit to collect people who he then used to kill.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that's an interesting moment because it starts with the aftermath of Antarctica, which happened because of him working for Sinister.
Yep.
And then later in the series, he goes to Sinister and like gets his help with something.
Yeah.
While still sort of like dealing with that issue. So that's interesting. That's an interesting kind of arc to do.
Yeah. There's a couple issues where Gambit is being chased by a bunch of different assassins, and I mean like B-grade, C-grade supervillains. So Bullseye is chasing him, who makes sense, like power level and everything as a Gambit villain. Constrictor's there. So there's just a bunch of like other people's villains who are like a match for Gambit chasing after him, which I remember enjoying slightly. And Rogue shows up.
Yeah, Rogue is interwoven throughout all of it.
I remember reading a review of like when Rogue shows up in issue like 15, she shows up and like takes over the book, and somebody being like, why doesn't Rogue have an ongoing series? This book is so much better now that Rogue showed up. Yeah. See, when I was reading like the Assassins thing, I'm like, that's kind of what I want to see, like Gambit dealing with people on his level. And that was when it was also like as fun for me as when I remember reading people talk about it. Like, oh, this is the fun, exciting stuff. Whereas I guess more action than captions. And then it ends with him, I guess it doesn't end with him because issue 24 has him dealing with New Sun and a big super-powered fight and everything.
Yeah, which is another thing I don't want to see Gambit do.
Yeah, it's definitely, Gambit's powers are all over the place. At the end, his powers are back. When I get to the last issues where he's fighting New Sun and everything, I'm like, oh, this isn't what I wanted, I guess.
Like, you don't need, like, alternate realities and he's like a god or whatever.
He gets stuck in the past for a while.
Yeah, that was really confusing in the trade.
Yeah, well, that's where the 6-month gap also takes place, I believe, when he's in the past. They do the 6 months later. Do you like the art in this book?
I do not like the art in this
book.
I don't dislike it like I dislike a lot of early X-Men art. Like that it has depth and that it's like really fleshed out, but the character designs I don't love.
Gambit has very pouty lips.
He does, and he actually changes quite a bit throughout it. Like there's a couple issues that are very stylized, and I don't like the way that they are. I mean, I guess it's fine. It's a little more. You're gonna disagree with me here. It's a little more colorful than I really want it to be. Like every single page.
Oh, see, I like the color.
I know.
Yeah, it does sound like you like the miniseries.
I knew you would. That's what I mean. I think that I like the like sketchy,
the grungy
look.
90s where he's charging people and pushing out windows.
Everything is very detailed, but it's not realistic looking, and so it's all just like, bleh. I don't know. It's not for me, the art.
Please don't send us hate mail about Hilary's taste in comic book art.
You know what? Everyone feels different. It's a subjective medium.
I gotta say, though, most of the supporting characters that are new to this book are very forgettable to me. The new characters that are introduced, I'm not a big fan of. Like, I can't remember any of their names. Especially, like, the guild members. The new guild members that we meet, it's just like, you won't be sticking around. Gambit's dad, it's just kind of like...
Well, you've known him pretty well.
Yeah, but it's still just kind of like, I've never had any interest in seeing Gambit. You could have told me Gambit's dad was dead and I'd be fine.
Yeah, the fact that... Yeah, that's true. Like, it's interesting to hear about his backstory with the assassins. Or with the Thieves Guild. Yeah. That's interesting. But it's not particularly interesting to hear about, like, his family life. Yeah. You know? Like, there's the whole thing about, like, him not really, like they kick him out and like he doesn't really connect with his dad and blah, and like I don't care.
I've never really cared about Gambit and his father relationship. I guess he's too old to care. It almost feels like Gambit's like too much of an adult, an independent adult.
Well, he's written so. I mean, he always strikes me as the grown up. Yeah. You know, like there's the others who are sort of like just scraping along, and he's lived an entire life by the time he gets to the X-Men. So yeah, that's true. He's like he's just too far along. He has to have his dad be like a main plot point.
Yeah, I mean he has to be, older if he was grown up Gambit during the Morlock massacre. Right. So I mean there was a lot of history before he shows up. Then like I think that's almost like 4 or 5 years in comics. Yeah. He's definitely, him and Wolverine always kind of strike me as like, I think they tried to play up Cyclops also, but Cyclops always seems younger than he's in that cartoon at least.
He's like a young guy trying to pretend to be a grown up.
Yeah. The series was always kind of, I guess when I read it, I was disappointed because I had almost, 20 years of build up to like, I'm going to read this book sometime. And then I did, and I was like, oh, but like I said, had I read this as a teenager where I didn't care about dense... And I mean, there is a lot of yellow captions. Yes. That's not even the inner monologue, just descriptions. And then you get all the inner monologue and the dialogue, and it doesn't... It's a dense read.
Reading this book doesn't feel like you're reading a story. It feels like you're reading an encyclopedia.
There's a lot.
And I feel like young Eric would have loved that. Yeah. Because he's actually reading encyclopedias.
Yeah, that's true.
About the X-Men. Yeah. But yeah, when you're lying in bed trying to kill time before you fall asleep, this is not what you want.
But Blade shows up.
Blade does show up. There are such random cameos. So I
should give the book that also credit. Any book that brings in Blade in the comics. Yeah.
This is the only thing I've ever read with Blade.
Oh, yeah. Well, Blade is very underused in the Marvel Comics. Yeah. Very underused for being so cool.
You do get to find out where he decided to use cards.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of a fun little thing. Yeah. Because they were just, like, there. Mm-hmm. And he was like, I have to charge something. What am I going to charge? Yeah. This is too big. This is too small. Cards. Perfect.
Yeah. I guess that plays better than, like, how did Wolverine get his jacket in the movies? Where it's not like...
I just need to know where it came from.
It's not like one of those, like, those were my father's special cards that his father gave to him. And then one day, a lot of it was already bordering on slightly archaic at the time. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people were enjoying it because of that at the time. Because it was like a
throwback?
Well, because it was just quality writing as well. I mean, there's a lot there, but it's not necessarily, like... bad and a lot. So Bishop's comic series, which launched at the same time, isn't remembered very well. And also there was a series called Mutant X, not the TV show, but there was a Havoc was in an alternate reality, and it's apparently one of the worst comic books ever written anywhere.
Well, now I have to read it.
And so I think people are just like, it's a solo X-Men book about Gambit that has turned out better than anyone expected. Yeah. And it's, good writing, because Fabian is a quality writer, but I think, so like a couple years later, Nasiza goes along and he writes Cable Deadpool, which lasts for like 50 issues or so, and that's a lot less dense, but there's still a lot of writing in there, but you can tell that he's kind of changed his style to match the times, and I think...
Well, I think, like the content, I think technically is good. Like the story, if you like spread it out on a table, is like, this is interesting. I'm interested in all the stuff with like him connecting or not connecting with the various X-Men and how they respond to things. I'm interested in his relationship with Xavier, which gets in there a little bit. There are things that are interesting.
Yeah.
But it's so condensed. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if he spreads things out more in the later series that he does, that makes a lot of sense. The same quality of overall story, but told in a better way.
Right. Like 2001 is when Grant Morrison shows up to write the X-Men, and where Ultimate X-Men comes out. Ultimate X-Men #1 comes out like a month or two after this series ends. So I think Marvel was just like, we gotta reboot the X-Men.
Yeah.
And I think, Gambit is a different time. Didn't blow me away the way... I just got to it too late, as I said.
Yeah,
so,
that makes sense.
Part of me still really wants to have liked it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it could be one of the things that in hindsight you like, because you like the memories of the story. Like if you think about, it's cool that thing happened to Gambit.
Yeah.
But when you're like slogging through it, it's not an enjoyable read. It's like stuff that's fun to know, not fun to learn.
Maybe that's it. I mean, the cover says the most mysterious X-Men of all in his own monthly magazine, which I always kind of, even when I saw that as a kid, I'm like, he's not the most mysterious X-Men.
I mean,
he's mysterious because he doesn't tell anybody anything, whereas like Wolverine is just like, I literally cannot remember.
Yeah, he's purposefully
if I'm right-handed or left-handed.
It's part of his persona to be mysterious.
Yeah. When you're talking about villains and stuff and smaller villains, like New Sun is a big, like a powerful villain by the end, but never is he interesting.
Never.
And that type of character is never very interesting to me.
Well, he's so off-screen the entire time.
If this book was more maybe Executioner, Sabretooth, Sinister stuff.
If they had those... Yeah. Without trying to like shoehorn in this like overarching plot that does not connect at all.
So there was a Mystique series. You read the Mystique series that Brian K. Vaughan did, where Professor X was basically having Mystique go on secret missions. And it was kind of like a James Bond book where like Forge was there as her Q.
Which I liked that. That was a good use of him.
And so she was going off doing like James Bond missions, and I feel like Gambit might have benefited from that type of direction.
That is exactly what they should have done.
Where Xavier would be like, I have thief missions that I need you to do. Or
I would read infinite issues of that kind of thing.
Yeah. And this one, because there's just so much always going on that isn't about Gambit's adventures. That's all this stuff happening in the background. And in the background for so long, it definitely comes across like, can we get to the good stuff? So like I said, like when those villains show up and are chasing Gambit throughout New York, I'm like, okay, this is fun. Well, it was canceled, as I had said.
Canceled at 25.
At 25, yep.
Who wrote the 25th one?
February 2001, just as Ultimate X-Men #1 was coming out. Joe Purett and penciler was George Gently. So it's funny because it says issue 25 is a double-sized anniversary issue. It even says the story starts here. But anyway, it was canceled, and then he had to share in his series with Bishop.
But I sort of feel like X-Men, you do like a running series of the X-Men.
Right.
And maybe when you have individual character stuff, maybe it should just always be
a miniseries. Yeah.
Because it's never going to last.
Yeah.
So, like, just do a nice contained thing and then have just the X-Men be the one that runs
The only X-Men who has ever been able to carry on an ongoing series has been Wolverine. And even Chris Claremont in the 80s didn't want to do that. Yeah. He disagreed that, like, as you said, he even said Wolverine would best be served with like a 6-issue miniseries, like every year, every other year, so a different writer can do like something different with him. But we're just like, no, we want him to have his own series. And the X-Men have a bad case of lots of characters they try to give Nightcrawler his own series, Storm her own series. Rogue had her own series. Every site, they all get their own series, and they all get canceled. And it's just like the X-Men, more than like, because so many other superhero teams are characters who are already individual heroes who then are brought together. Yeah. Whereas the X-Men are always...
They're just a team.
Yes,
they're a team.
It's a team book first, and those characters appear there.
Yeah, and it's interesting to look at them individually.
Right.
But not enough to make an entire series.
Well, they're always built to fit in the X-Men.
Right.
So, like, Nightcrawler is fit to be jovial and is, even though he looks the way he does, and that's supposed to contrast with some of the other X-Men. Yeah. But none of them, they're not built as, like, heroes who then join.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Gambit definitely suffered from that. Because he was also, you know, a Claremont character, so built for the X-Men and everything. I think Claremont even intended for him to be a villain someday, but he left the series. So
yeah. So.
All right, so this was the 1999 to technically 2001, February 2001 Gambit ongoing series. Wouldn't be his last, but it would be the last one he ever got over 17 issues with. Our upcoming episode is on X-Men 2.
Yay,
or
movie.
X2, X-Men United.
X-Men United.
And then following that is the first 2 episodes of the X-Men 90s show.
Yes, which I have in this closet right here on VHS.
Do you have to rewatch it?
I'm going
sure
to rewatch it.
No, I know, but I'm sure you remember Night of the Sentinels verbatim.
Yes, I have seen that.
So
more times than I want to.
Hilary will be performing that episode live as all the characters. So I'm Dust vs. Tweak everywhere online, and apart from other shows on Radio Meanwhile Network, I'm the co-host of the podcast, The All the Books Show. Thank you to Prophetic Music for our theme song. As I said, join us in upcoming episodes. So again, you can find more about this show and others like it at the network's website, radiomeanwhile.com. Please follow us on Facebook or Twitter at Nice Things Pod. Please rate, subscribe, and share the show. What?
Incorrect.
Don't listen to Hilary. Don't listen to her at all.
It's not Nice Things Pod.
Oh, son of a gun! Please follow us on Facebook or Twitter at Previously on X, and please rate, subscribe, and share the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. See you next episode, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.